I'm very much in favor of staying here in the Smith Center, remodeling, renovating, whatever we need to do. I do not want to go off campus.
And what university leadership is trying to say is actually going to be a big part of campus. So with Roy coming out and actually making a video in favor of renovation, you have to imagine that led to a lot of difficult conversations behind the scenes about how to move forward.
Hey everybody, welcome on into another edition of Tying Together with Tim Boyum. I am Tim Boyum here with producer John McHugh as always. This week we're going to talk a little bit about the politics of sports. And we're going to bring out a return guest. And yes, we're talking about UNC Chapel Hill. But yes, I think all of you are going to be interested, even if you don't like sports, because this fight over what to do with the Dean Dome, the Smith Center, the basketball arena at UNC Chapel Hill has taken on a life of its own. And John, we're bringing in Greg Barnes from Inside Carolina. This is fascinating. It's a little bit of a look into the sports world today.
Yeah, and these things almost never play out in public like this. So it's really interesting to see that and how vocal people are being.
Yeah.
You know, I just went through the same thing with Penn State where they're renovating the football stadium. And there was a lot of back and forth, but it was not, you didn't have former coaches and alumni talking in public about it. It was all scuttlebutt what you heard. It wasn't out there.
Yeah. And it's a big debate that is sometimes emotional versus economical, which don't always match and come to the same spot. But it's played out really dramatically over the last few weeks. So Greg Barnes is with Inside Carolina. They just announced Carolina North, which is another campus that UNC is going to build that's almost the same size as the existing campus. And that might be where the basketball arena goes. And that's where this story takes some wild turns. And Greg, one of the best in the business, is going to help us break through it all. Greg, let's start, because I don't take for granted, particularly my podcast, where some people don't follow sports as closely as politics. Let's start with Carolina North. So this, I don't think people realize the scope of this, especially with the debate about the arena, whether it be on campus or not. I think I covered this like almost 20 years ago. This is a long time coming and is almost going to double the footprint of UNC, right?
It will. It actually came to be back in 2007 was when the Board of Trustees actually kind of stepped into that role of talking about Carolina North and formulating a plan. The economic crisis at the time kind of shelved it, but it's a massive tract of land. It's where the old Ernie Williamson Airport was, which closed down finally in 2018. It's a massive area, as you note, and already about 250 acres of that land is cleared and ready to go. And in terms of footprint, it's not quite as big as the current main campus at UNC, but it's pretty close. And so you're talking about a significant chunk of land. Lee Roberts told Board of Trustees last week that he believes it's one of the largest tracts of land that's undeveloped near a bustling area, growing population zone in the Southeast. So that speaks to the size of this area. And it's something, as you mentioned, it's been in the works for nearly 20 years. And it's finally set to break ground next year in 2027.
And so for the purpose of the arena debate, you know, everyone says we want to keep it on campus. It's likely in 10, 20, 30 years, people are going to look back at it, and it is going to be campus. It may not be old campus, but it is going to be a huge part of UNC Chapel Hill's campus.
It is, and that's part of the communication that Lee Roberts and the university leadership has tried to make as they've gone to stakeholders of like, yeah, we're just starting this process, but it is going to be a key part of campus moving forward. And one of the first phases that they talked about last week at that Board of Trustees meeting was the fact that there are 2,200 beds for undergraduate housing are going to be there. So that kind of speaks to where this is going. And I think it's critically important for people to understand that UNC has decided that over the next decade, they're going to be adding roughly 500 students per year. So when you're talking about 5,000 new students over a decade, you've got to find room to house those students. And so this is all part of that process. And the interesting concept here is that the Smith Center talk, which really came about 18 months ago with Carolina North being a reference point, that really put Carolina North on the map with regard to Carolina fans and boosters and that kind of thing. But they're separate. And yeah, I think that's kind of your point is Carolina North, the concept of what that's going to be for the university has been ongoing for a long time, decades now. Potentially putting an arena there as an anchor spot is relatively new. And I think people hear new arena, Carolina North, and just assume that's the only thing that's going to be there. And that just is not the case.
But it is driven there by the economic possibilities of putting a new arena with development around it. And that's why it's sort of a newer concept probably as well too, right?
Absolutely. And it's going to be the idea would be that would be the anchor site for that Carolina North. The whole idea is that you have a mixed use development. And for the arena, there's a lot of potentials there. You can do hotels, restaurants, bars. You could set it up for concert venues. There's a whole host of options that you can do. When you look at like the Atlanta Braves, they've done a fantastic job around their new stadium, making use of that type of project. There have been others that have tried a similar approach that have not been quite as successful. And so that's part of the dialogue is it sounds good, but will it actually come to fruition?
All right. So again, for those that don't follow us closely, what is, and I'm holding air quotes here, wrong with the Dean Dome? It's celebrating 4 years just this month, in fact. What is wrong with it that they either have to renovate or replace it?
Really, 2 points here. Number one, the Smith Center was built in the early to mid 80s. And it was really during that odd time where the emphasis on arena builds were capacity, you maximize in size, without much focus on premium seating. If you look at the old Charlotte Coliseum that George Shin built, that opened in 1988, I believe. It was very similar. You had all this room, 22,000, whatever it was, but you didn't really have any premium seating. And then when you add in the fact that Shin wanted a new facility and they wanted it downtown, they ultimately tore it down, not 20 years after it had been built. And you see what the Spectrum Center is now. But the Dean Dome was kind of built in that frame of work where there wasn't any premium seating included. So that's one of the problems. The other part of it is, if you go back to 2013, that's when Bubba Cunningham first enlisted some architects to give him some planning options for the Smith Center, because back then there was a significant amount of work that needed to be done. In the way that the Dean Smith Center is set up, there's only one concourse. It's very narrow. The bathrooms, you still have a trough style approach for the men's bathroom, which is very outdated. And so there's just a lot of needs. And part of that 2013 search was, can we do enough work to make this building work as it is, or do we need to look at building a new arena elsewhere? And of course, Carolina North was not part of the conversation at that time, and now it is. When I sat down with Lee Roberts last summer, he projected that just replacing the Dean Smith Center roof would run roughly $80 to $100 million. And that's not to speak to some of the other changes that would have to take place with regard to the concourses and the bathrooms and a lot of the other spaces. The other component that's worth mentioning is that when they built the Smith Center, there's a tremendous amount of rock in on the south side of the building that they had to blast for. And so because of that, a lot of these arenas nowadays have a full circle kind of downstairs where you can access to and you can get trucks underneath and all those types of things. That's not the case at the Smith Center. It's really about a half circle. And so there's a lot of little problems like that make this worthwhile. And Lee Roberts' point was, if we're going to have to spend at least $100 million for the roof, we should at least consider other potential options for the basketball program.
And the concourse issue, in fact, that's why they sold beer at football games first, but the basketball arena wasn't because they had to figure out how to even be able to sell beer with lines and where to put it and stuff. And that kind of delayed the beer sales because of the concourse issue.
Yeah, that's certainly part of it. And if you've been to a game at the Smith Center, it gets very tight very quickly. And that's a significant problem. And even if they decide to go about doing a renovation, which is certainly a consideration, that's a massive project to be able to address that issue.
Right, so before we get to the sort of where to do and the controversy around that, also the part of the issue too is a lot of people want to get students closer. And when the Dean Dome was built and how they raised money, that impacted where people sit in that arena to this day and the rights that they still hold, correct?
It is. It's a very unique situation back then. At the time, you didn't have these privately funded arenas. And Erskine Bowles actually played a big role in this. But along with Dean Smith, they were able to go to boosters and raise roughly $35 million for the arena. And in doing so, basically, they were able to provide permanent seat licenses for the boosters who donated. And part of that deal was your licensing costs are covered throughout your life, as well as the next generation, so your children potentially. And that has just been a revenue strain for North Carolina over the years. It sounded good at the time, and it was beneficial and effective in getting the building built. But it also has limited student seating, kind of to your point, because those seats are, roughly half of them are in the lower bowl, scattered about. So that limits somewhat of what you can do with big sections of student seating. But it also is that revenue component. And some of the numbers that we've heard is you're talking about with a new arena, which would basically eliminate those seat licenses in that contract, could generate up to 5 to 6 million more annually just with those licenses.
And it contributes to the atmosphere, right? I mean, that's part of the. I think I watched the We're Number One documentary. I think it was Florida State back in 1993. They did the whole wine and cheese crowd. That's kind of where that comes from, right? I mean, I go there all the time. It is super loud when it is loud, but often it's not. I mean, so that contributes to kind of the atmosphere challenge that some people have with this, right?
Right. And it wasn't long after Sam Cassell's comments that they decided to bring students down to the risers behind the east goal, which has helped a little bit. And one of the interesting things too is if you go back 25 years, North Carolina was doling out, I think, about 6,000 student tickets per game, and that number has dwindled over the years, in part due to student interest and just in part trying to maximize ticket sales. But yes, it's just kind of limited. You don't have students around the court other than that baseline section like you do at Cameron and really a lot of these other arenas. And so part of the conversation has been, if you were to renovate or to build new, what are the different types of seating configurations that you can have to make things better for the students and to provide more of a home court advantage? And that's one thing that Lee Roberts mentioned at the Board of Trustees meeting earlier this month.
All right, so let's briefly go over what kind of options are out there then with what to do with the arena if they kept it and other options where they might put a new one.
Well, you've got, there was a working master plan group back about 18 months ago that they were looking within the footprint of the university as a whole and trying to decide what are the options. So there were 6 initial options that they provided. 2 were at the current site. One was a major renovation, which would run several $100 million. One there was basically just maintain the current structure, do some maintenance, understanding that you're just kicking the can down the road 5 to 10 years. There was also consideration for the Bowles lot, which is just north of the Smith Centers where the primary parking for the arena is. Then you had Odom Village, which is still in consideration. And that's really just west of the Smith Center. That used to be a lot of student housing, much of which has been condemned. I think there was about 4 dozen homes there, apartments, and they're in the process of demolishing those just south of the hospital. The terrain apparently is pretty tricky, and so that's a significant consideration. And then you had 2 locations that were off of main campus, one being the Friday Center, which I don't think has ever really been a legitimate consideration, and then Carolina North. So you had 6 options, and the way that it's trended in the last couple of months is really Carolina North, which we've reported about a year ago, last February, was what university leadership was kind of leaning towards. And then, of course, the major renovation, which is what a lot of the former players in Roy Williams are advocating for.
Yeah, if you've ever parked in Bulls lot, you would know if they renovate, they have got to put a pedestrian bridge over the Bulls lot. That is a mess.
Yes, for sure.
All right, so let me ask you this, because it felt like they were close to making an announcement to maybe moving to Carolina North in as early as December. And then it maybe in conjunction with this larger Carolina North plan. And then we got past the new year. We got into January. And then this video comes out with Roy Williams and this concerted effort, which I'm guessing was a lot of former players, and a petition to renovate the Smith Center.
Hello, guys. This is Roy Williams, that old guy that's still hanging around. This message really goes out to you guys who are sitting back trying to figure out what's going on with all these questions and people talking about new arena, not a new arena. I've given my opinion very strongly. I'm very much in favor of staying here in the Smith Center, remodeling, renovating, whatever we need to do. I do not want to go off campus. I was Coach Smith's assistant for 10 years. We had many discussions about basketball, about life, about the golf course, everything. But I do know during the conversation about what to get out of this building, the Smith Center, that Coach Smith wanted this place on campus. That was his wish. There was no question. And he even told me one day that after he was dead and gone, it was up to me to fight to keep it on campus. He told me one time, he said, "You're the head coach now. Whatever you want, I want." And I said, "Coach, we both want the same thing. We want Carolina basketball to be special, Carolina basketball to be different." And the Smith Center is part of that.
And then a few days later, the Carolina North plan comes out, and there's no arena in it. Do we think that they were ready to announce Carolina North was going to be the place for the arena, but that last-minute pressure made them pull it back? Or was it earlier than that, do you think?
It's a good question, and I don't know the full details there. My speculation is that they were ready to move forward and decided to kind of halt and make sure they got everybody on board. And what we reported back in December is that there was a series of meetings that took place, whether it be with key stakeholders, boosters, with the basketball office, with the Rams Club, and there was even a video call with former players, which got pretty heated. And the attempt at that point in time was to lay out the results of these 18 months of studies that they've done, trying to figure out what the best option moving forward was. And they were trying to seek alignment. And so our expectation was that as you get into January, the announcement seemed likely. Lee Roberts said last summer that he had hoped to make a decision and an announcement on the future of the Smith Center by the end of the calendar year. So that has come and gone. And I do think, with there being such a concerted effort with Roy Williams being a key piece of it, advocating for a renovation at the current site, certainly that's played a role. And I did find it interesting that at the Board of Trustees meeting earlier this month, Lee Roberts talked about there being two new committees being formed, one of students and then one of basketball folk. So that kind of speaks to the fact that not everybody's on board. Not that you're ever going to get complete unison on this type of decision, but you at least need to have everybody kind of understanding what the process is. So it sounds like we're still several months away.
Is that possible that those committees are being formed to try to convince folks that this is okay and a good move?
I don't know that it's so much about trying to convince folks. I think it's more about just making sure everybody understands what the options are. And if a decision is made, whether it be to renovate or to move to Carolina North, why that decision is being made. One of the things that we've heard a lot of is, you mentioned earlier, people talk about the concept of, well, this is off campus. How can they move Carolina's basketball arena off campus? And what university leadership is trying to say is actually going to be a big part of campus. So while it is away from main campus by about 2 miles, it's a key part of where things are going to be 20 years from now. So I think a lot of effort to help people understand that component is what part of this is about.
I don't think it's surprising that someone like Roy Williams or Tyler Hansbrough or Bryce Johnson, these players that had their glory part of their lives in that arena would do this. I do feel like it was shocking to see Roy Williams in that video in the Smith Center doing that video. Was there sort of a shock factor there for even the administration perhaps, or just period that not he did the video, but it was in the Smith Center and he invoked Dean Smith in that video saying he would want it there?
Right. I think that speaks to the kind of the internal conflict with the situation, and that there was some surprise that he actually made the video in the Smith Center with the passion that he did. And it's interesting talking with a variety of people behind the scenes. Some people are gung-ho about Carolina North. They're solely focused on or primarily driven by the idea of revenue generation. And in this current era of college athletics, where you have NIL and rev share, revenue generation is very important. You've got to have it to stay elite in your key revenue sports. But then, of course, you've got if you listen to Roy Williams's video, he wasn't talking numbers. He was talking emotions in the past and what he believed that Dean Smith wanted. And so I think the path forward is that you've got to find a middle ground. You've got to be able to honor and recognize the past, because that's what made Carolina basketball what it is, while also understanding that if you want to make it so that Carolina basketball can continue to succeed and play at an elite level, there's got to be a lot of finances coming in, a lot of revenue generated. So that conversation is really what's going on behind the scenes, and everybody has an opinion, and that's been a fascinating part of this.
Yeah, I'd be curious to know what Dean Smith's family thinks too, because it's kind of interesting he invoked Dean Smith, but Dean Smith, I didn't know him personally, obviously like Roy Williams did, but I've met him once or twice. He was a very progressive guy with the program over the years. I'm not so certain he wouldn't support a move and to move this forward. He probably didn't even like that it was in his name. In fact, he didn't, right?
Correct. He did not like the fact that the Smith Center was named for him. It was going to be the Student Athletics Center. And I think it's an intriguing part. And I would certainly like to sit down with Dean Smith and have that conversation because he was progressive. And Dean played in 3 arenas during his time at UNC. And one of the great stories from when he passed is that a lot of his former players, I guess all of them, got a $200 check from his estate. And they actually had to go to the NCAA to make sure that this is not an issue with impermissible benefits, with a coach sending money to former players, which is just fascinating. It kind of speaks to his progressive mindset. And unfortunately, we will never know, but I do think it's an interesting part of this conversation.
I don't think they'll ever get some of these players on board, but I do wonder if time and a better explanation of why this is important and the things like that it will be on campus will make a difference. Because, and I don't want to speak for the boards inside Carolina, but I feel like I've noticed just perusing the premium boards that over time, posters on the Inside Carolina board have also migrated toward moving it to Carolina North. Have you noticed that, or do you think I'm off base?
Probably. I think the understanding component of it is a key aspect here, which is probably why the decision has been delayed a little bit. But I think the more that people understand kind of what the goal is. Now, you're always going to have some that believe that it's just a search for money and it's trying to put money in people's pockets that have deals with developers and those types of things. And people are going to have whatever beliefs they want to have. But I think when you look at the opportunity that exists, there's a risk-reward component. And the way that university leadership has talked about Carolina North is it's the opportunity to develop a world-class, state-of-the-art facility that separates UNC from its peers. Now, one of the interesting components when you talk about former players, I agree that they enjoy the idea of the Smith Center because it's where all their memories were made. But they're also open to the idea of making a move if it makes sense for the basketball program. And one of the key points made in that player meeting back in December was it's fine to focus on the real estate component of this, but this has got to be with the basketball program in mind. It's got to be a Carolina basketball arena first and foremost. And if it's not, then this is being done the wrong way. So I think if you can make the point, if you're university leadership, to those individuals of, okay, we understand the importance of what North Carolina basketball has been built upon. And this is kind of what we're thinking about doing to honor that legacy while helping the program in the years ahead. That's that needle to thread, if you will. Easier said than done, of course, but I think that's the path they're trying to take.
Yeah, it's interesting. John Henson kind of, he was like, I could see it both ways. Bryce Johnson has been very outspoken about keeping it in place the way it is. But what I find interesting about it is he compares it to the Fog, Kansas, and of course Cameron. But obviously Duke they keep that, but obviously they're losing a significant amount of revenue to keep up, and they get their funding elsewhere, obviously, right? I mean, those aren't apples to apples, pretty much.
Correct. That's one of the challenges here too. Cameron's his own little animal, and yes, they certainly are not maximizing their revenue with that facility. but it is unique. And then the fog, what I find so fascinating about that is that's Carmichael. And if you go back 40 years, the way that Carmichael is, they've built up around that in the middle of campus. You've got all the various sports and the fields right there at Carmichael. That is exactly Allen Fieldhouse, because all around Allen Fieldhouse is all these different athletic complexes. And the decision was made at Kansas years and years ago that they wanted it to stay like that. Well, Carolina made the decision not to do that 40 years ago.
Which pissed people off, by the way, back then.
Correct. And so that's why it's interesting talking to some older people who were around at the time making the decisions. They referred to the Smith Center at that time as UNC Pittsburgh because it was so far south of main campus. So it is an interesting, but the other part of it too is a lot of the people in favor of renovation have kind of spoken out behind the scenes saying that the idea that if a renovation takes place, Carolina would have to play somewhere else for 2 years.
Yeah.
Which is apparently what university leadership has said behind the scenes. They've kind of pushed back on that idea, and they've pointed to Thompson Bowling Arena at Tennessee, and they did a massive renovation a few years ago without impacting the regular season. Spectrum Center in Charlotte, they did a $250 million expansion a couple years ago without impacting the season. So a lot of different talking points behind the scenes trying to figure out what the best path forward is.
Is it easy to get the students down in a new arena? And do those people just lose those rights altogether with a new arena that just gets wiped clean? And then they offer those people box seats or something like that? Is that the idea? And is that how it would work likely?
So my understanding is that the language of those contracts is that if there's anything done at the current site, including a renovation, that the licenses continue on for that building. At a new arena, it stops. Now, I would imagine you would have options to buy seats or whatever at the next arena, but the licensing agreement would cease. So that's a big part of it. In terms of students getting to the games, that's a big talking point. And so they've already started the process of a rapid transit bus system with dedicated lanes that runs from Franklin Street, I think actually South Village, all the way up to Carolina North to address some of those concerns. But it certainly would be a busing scenario initially until they can figure it out. And of course, a lot of people don't like that. A lot of people like the idea of students stepping out of their dorm rooms and just being able to walk down the hill to the Smith Center.
It's just such a fascinating conversation because it's so emotional. But you can't ignore that, right? And you can't ignore the Roy Williams of the world. I don't know. It's just fascinating. Is there expectation that these players and Roy Williams, as long as they are listened to and kind of come around, that this won't be an issue if what feels like inevitably they move to North?
I think that's the hope. I would imagine that they probably wanted Roy Williams to be a vocal component.
To raise money.
Right, exactly. I mean, that's the key part of it. So with Roy coming out and actually making a video in favor of renovation, you have to imagine that led to a lot of difficult conversations behind the scenes about how to move forward. But you have to bridge that gap. If Roy has so much sway with the former players, and for good reason. I mean, he's kind of the caregiver of the Carolina basketball family. You have to figure out a way to get him on board. That doesn't mean he totally agrees with the decision, but you've got to convince him that's best for the program moving forward. And I think that's probably the linchpin of this whole thing.
Last few minutes here. Let's talk about Lee Roberts for a minute. We talked about that this plan originally came out in 2007 for Carolina North. We've had several chancellors since then that have not got this past the finish line. Obviously, a lot has happened. But if he didn't come in and he wasn't in place, do you think, A, North gets through, and B, that this discussion about where to put the arena would be totally different?
It's a great question. And I think with Lee's background in real estate and understanding the financial side of things, he certainly has provided a new perspective. Because when you go back and look at all the chancellors before him, most of them worked their way up through the UNC system, and pretty much all of them were academics. Lee Roberts is not that. Lee Roberts has got a finance background and understands the business side of things. And so it's a completely different look. And one thing that I asked him last summer was because he was so involved with the Bill Belichick hire and a lot of these other components going on in athletics, what led him to be so involved. And he was very pointed in saying, look, I'm not trying to micromanage anything on the athletic side. It's just that there's so many key decisions that had to be made quickly that it was important for my inclusion in those conversations. So he fully intends to kind of keep his hands off of things. But I think the opportunity for Carolina North to come to fruition was very important. As we mentioned earlier, when you talk about increasing enrollment by 5,000 over a decade, that's important. He's also talked about the hospital and how hospitals are always needing new land for growth, and that's part of the Dean Smith area conversation as well. So I don't know. I don't know that the arena moving to Carolina North would take the turn that it has without Lee Roberts. But I don't think there's any question they've been talking about Carolina North as being a key part of the university's growth for a long time.
If you were a gambling man and you had to put money down, do you think we hear a spring announcement, and would you be surprised if it's not Carolina North? And don't answer that if it's not fair to ask you that.
No, that's my belief that the hope had been for over a year that they would end up at Carolina North. That's kind of what university leadership has thought, to our understanding. So I believe that we're probably looking at something by the end of the semester, and I would be surprised if it's not Carolina North.
All right, one last dumb question. Belichick doesn't get in the Hall of Fame. What was the hubbub and athletics behind that? Anything?
Just silliness about there's so many petty agendas and those types of things in the NFL. I think everybody understands that if Bill Belichick is not a first ballot Hall of Famer, then just do away with the Hall of Fame. I think that extends well beyond the Chapel Hill community.
I do wonder if they had to change some things, though. They were probably excited to say our NFL Hall of Fame coach. There might have been some marketing with that or something. I don't know. But Greg, you are one of the best at what you do. I appreciate your time. Thank you so much, man.
Thank you for having me on.
If you want to keep up with what's happening in North Carolina politics and hear more conversations with people shaping our state and beyond, check out the Tying It Together YouTube channel in the description. Hit subscribe and let Spectrum News be your resource for balanced, in-depth political coverage, elections, and issues that matter to you.